one person can say, oh my God, woe is me, look at the world, look at the evil that pervades. And you get a lot of this. You get a lot of websites, you get a lot of fearmongers. I certainly get inundated with emails and calls and, oh, God's sake, all these people are just in a total state of paranoia. Well, you remember, when the mind is traumatized, it stops thinking. And even when it's mildly traumatized, it just avoids. So it's not that the average Joe today doesn't know that there's a sort of an alternative history movement out there, or that the web is not, full of amazing things that you can find out about history and religion. Of course, most people know that this stuff is going on. They listen to Alex Jones. They've heard David Icke. They just avoid it. They just switch off. They know it's there. They know there's information, but they're never going to buy a book. They're never going to turn it on. They're never going to listen, because it causes trauma to think that these guys are basically telling me on a subliminal level that everything I know is wrong. So either I laugh at them, make fun of them, which of course has happened in all of their lives, and has happened in my life as well. It doesn't bother me in the slightest, but it certainly has traumatized the hell out of David Icke, and I'm sure it doesn't bother Alex Jones. But that's just temperament, And also, I've done my homework. I'm sort of stronger because I've done my homework and I know what I'm doing is right for me. And it just turns out other people want to hear about it. I've never gone out there hoping that people will be interested in what I've said. I've never had that desire. The people have come to me, of their own bat and say, hey man, we're turned on by what you do. But it's not that I ever made a career out of this kind of thing on purpose.
I think within that is why you've reached a lot of conclusions that were just out of reach for a lot of people, because I think there's so many people that may have found this before, but just would never say a thing,
Well, I meet those people now. A lot of them email me, and they want to be a silent minority, and they're very. And in fact, there's some of the things I've discovered, particularly that I put on the appendices pages for both books. Is sent to me by people, sent to me by some people who are very, very good at linguistics and etymology and all of this kinds of in an alternative way, I must say. And we look into this, and we look at all of the. Because remember, again, this is in order to understand. Like I said, in order to understand the enemy, and you have to look at all the things that they're doing, it's quite a broad subject. It's not one area. You cannot be a person who's just only, compartmentalized. You'll never see it. It's the same thing you brought up at the beginning when you said about how come people who are part of this don't know it. Well, the compartmentalization is the answer. This is something that requires a lot of spectrum, a lot of surveillance, a lot of ability to take, like a detective, like a Sherlock Holmes, to bring so many seemingly divergent, disconnected parts together and bring them together and form them into a new sort of jigsaw, a new kind of, a sculpture. Now, see, 99% of the people from within an academic circle, that's the least of the things that they can do. No. They may pretend that they're experts at this, but actually the facts of the matter is they're not. It's the Manuel Velikovskys that can do that, right? It's people on the outside of the, official think tanks and the officialdom. The official academic has no ability to do this as far as I'm concerned, nor does he have the inclination to do it, because he works in a system that will penalize him for doing so. So his attention is entirely focused on the subject that he's into, with occasionally a bit of, sidetracking. But for the most part, and this is provable from people within the system, the Leonard Schleins. Just read the opening introduction of Richard Milton's book, Shattering the Myths of Darwinism, and he addresses this. This has also been addressed by Leonard Schlein. It was addressed in the past by Arthur Koestler, some of the highest people up the totem pole within academia. So I'm not just throwing this out because I think this. I've read this from people within academia who've lamented this tremendous compartmentalization. Theodore Roszak, you see, from Berkeley. I mean, we have a lot of thinkers, Jacob Needleman. There's been so many people who've addressed this compartmentalization and the bane of it. So we're not going to be able, and of course, look, it's simple, isn't it? If we are society waiting for some goddamn linguist or waiting for some other expert from within academic to ever address the crimes of religion, to ever address what has been going on with secret societies and royal families, my God, we are going to have the longest wait, and we have been having the longest wait. So as far as I'm concerned, these people have no say in what is considered an alternative field. That's what's called alternative. There wouldn't be an alternative movement, Adam, if these guys from academic had been doing their jobs.
And they should know better, because they obviously are following their, their cues. They're following their cues, and they're doing what they're told to keep their positions. And these are the people studying things, so they have to be putting a lot aside. They have to be setting it down and putting a lot aside. And
but the psychological motive for doing that is threat. Just in the same way that the ordinary man in the street will laugh at the David Icks and laugh at me and all these things and turn it off or just avoid listening to what we're talking about, The academic world has a much higher quotient of threat because they have the long strings of letters after their name. They're the ones whose knees are, been on the floor to the system. They're the ones who maintain the status quo. Their world is where the consensus is not only strong but super strong.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think they feel, these Oxford, Cambridge, Princeton, Cornell dudes who've climbed and slithered and Masonic handshook their way up to the top of the ladder and have been given all the rewards, and believe me, those rewards are very, significant. Look at the Sorbonne in France, right? And believe me, I'm not talking about all people from within the academic. Obviously, there are exceptions to every rule. But the vast majority of these sycophants and these arrogant pretenders to knowledge is the threat when some individual without those letters on their name, you see, and people from outside of that start coming up with amazing things from within geology, from within linguistics, within racial studies, you see, or ethnology or archaeology, particularly, and particularly geology, because most of the people that I read, you see, especially when I was compiling the Atlantis book, is a lot to, geology and anthropology and archaeology. For instance, Michael Cremo, Richard Milton, Allen and Dallaire, etc., you see. So we have a bunch of people from within academic and also from outside. Barry Fell jumps to mind. I mean, the list is endless. These people are the biggest threat to these academics, and that is why, as yet, you haven't had a bunch of academics come along to endorse the, let's say, people in the alternative, research community. It's still the reason why you haven't heard of Ahmed Osman and even Ralph Ellis and Mustafa Gadala. Those are three writers who, I don't know what's in their own head, but as far as I'm concerned, they're not from within the strict academic world, right? They are alternative people. I mean, most of their readership would be an alternative readership. Yet their works are monumental as to what they've discovered about Egypt and Akhenaten and so on. Yet those people, as yet, I don't see Discovery Channel or History Channel, you see, or any channel running to give millions to these people, nor will it ever happen. So here's the predicament that we're in, that we also now have an academic group whose entire matrix is threatened by what very humble people. It's always been like this. And thank God now we're in a situation where you can self-publish, or you can go to smaller, publishers. You can put together something on DVD like we do, and you can do shows like you're doing, Adam. And this is very, very good because, as I'm saying, this natural energy of change that is taking place, I believe, is very, very significant. I've actually linked this new energy in my work even to what Christians would refer to as the Holy Spirit. And I do that to make it very clear that there's nothing small or petty or meaningless about the changes that are coming in our age. We are literally in the state of Armageddon. We are literally in a countdown to and we're actually in it, the age of awakening. The age of revealing is happening right now. I look at my own work as being a key example of this. I look at the emails that I'm getting as a key example of this. I look at the work that other people are putting together, as a key example of this. And I'm looking at the awakening, however slow or gradual that it is, as also signs of this. And long may it continue, these movies and even the smaller little productions that are coming out and people's individual awakening. And I don't care if that awakening takes place through total frustration and disgruntlement from some people who just are so fed up with the garbage that they've been handed by their parents and by the world. Brilliant. If the goal of that is awakening, then so be it. Or if it's a natural, colder, more intellectual, curiosity towards a new kind of study, a new kind of interest, a new kind of subject matter that they come upon this stuff, then again, by all means, I really don't care what is the motive as long as the goal is awakening. And we are seeing that. The evidence is there. And that is why on the other side, these sorcerers, you see, have to then turn up the faucet on their side also.
Right.
They're not going to sit by, you see, while this kind of psychological change takes place.
The pace of it all has just increased so much.
Yeah,
and,
you increase the frequency.
It's
but let's never forget.
Panic, right? I mean,
that's right. And threat. Remember, haven't they held that whole pyramid together with a bunch of promissory notes? Haven't they given decorations and silly medals and stupid letters after the name to all these punks? Everyone wanting to have their face on Time magazine or whatever garbage, or a better seat on some other leviathan of evil. Oxford, Cambridge is full of it, full of the psychophantasm and full of that arrogance, that preposterous arrogance. The whole thing is rotten to the core. Knowledge plays no part. What knowledge? It's ego. It's vanity. And it's the idea that they own knowledge. Now, I'm not saying that you don't have this within the alternative community as well. That's what I've been talking about earlier. You have it wall to wall throughout the bloody world. I get emails from all sorts of arrogant, these people always trying to, point the finger or nitpick on some minor area of my work, you see. And I understand what's underneath it, because I understand that greater than hatred, greater than any other emotion that exists in the world, envy is the key emotion. And maybe one day we can do a whole show just on that emotion. But in my world and in my vision of the world, envy is a very, 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 very key emotion to study, and it's different than jealousy.
From talks with John Lash about the Archons, the main motivation of the Archons, he said, that was written in the Gnostic literature, was envy.
I didn't know that. Is that right?
Yeah, he says the most clear definition of the motivation of the Archons, he says, is envy, and that they don't act in sensible ways. People wonder, well, what's this? Are they trying to take over? What are they trying to do? He says that in the Gnostic writings, their motivation is envy, but they don't operate by any kind of goal at all. He says all they want to do is with our minds.
Well, okay, then, I would endorse that 100%. And since we're on the subject of envy, I will add one more anecdote to expand on it so people understand. They need to understand specifically what I meant when I said that envy is not jealousy. Jealousy is not a vice, really, ultimately. And the reason is this. If you see Jimmy Page playing a beautiful rosewood double-neck Gibson SG, you might go, what a lucky bugger, look at that guitar, I'd like one. And I know because I've said it many times. I go, yeah, I love that guitar.
Look at that.
But that doesn't mean that you don't want him to have it.
Yeah.
Jealousy is just, oh, look at my neighbor's lawn, look at that, or look at that Camaro, or that, Viper he just bought. Jesus, I'd love one of those. Look at that guitar, it's magic, I'd love one of those. That's jealousy, but you're not saying that but jealousy can also be a celebration of the fact that Jimmy Page owns that guitar and he plays it really well, or that your neighbor has that amazing car and he bloody well deserves it for all the hard work he's put in. Envy, on the other hand, which is why it's so pernicious, and I'm not surprised that you tell me that now that it's been in the Gnostic Gospels, envy is very deep. Envy is very deep, and I don't think people in the world are that savvy to it at all. I don't think their antenna is as up on envy as it is on other, pernicious vices like greed and hatred and all of that. I believe envy outranks them all, and the reason is this. When you're envious of somebody who has something you want, and it can be a mental trait or it can be physical objects, you want it, but you don't want the other person to have it. What really hurts you is that person has it, or that person's good at it, or that person, you see, was worthy of it, or that person received it, or whatever, or that this person has come up with it on their own. Envy is where and envy is so dark, Adam, that you would even destroy that Gibson SG, and you would even go about not having it yourself, and even destroying all the Gibson double-neck SGs in the world, just so that he couldn't have it.
Right.
That's the difference. And people need to think about this, because there are people beside you, people walking around you, who really, really strongly have this kind of envy. And we have it, as you've just pointed out, in the scriptures, talking about the top forces there. There's this element within their brain. And so you see, and the place that you'll find it the most, even though a physical crime that you can take into court may not be attending the envy, doesn't make it any less of a crime. You're going to find it in the halls of the academica. And you see, one of the problems with this alternative movement, as we progress down the line, is that we may have this backlash in the so-called academic world, in which these academic types start to fear and start to really, get antsy about the fact that the Alex Joneses and David Icks and Michael Cremos, you see, and other people, other writers, who granted, their books are not done by major publishers in the world. Their books are more speculative. Their research may be less rigorous, as is demanded in academica. I'm accepting all of that. They may have more error, quote-unquote, in some of their books, because they're not as rigorously, edited or researched, etc., whatever. Well, that's only to be expected. But that is more than made up for by the scope and the brilliance of what these independent amateurs, you see, are discovering, the scope of it, which is not to be found in the academic world. So this is something that I'm foreseeing, you see, that the academic world is not just going to sit quiet. They didn't sit quiet when Augustus Laplangian was unraveling all the mysteries of the Maya back in the early 1900s. They didn't sit quiet when Wilhelm Reich was analyzing and completely discovering the roots of all human sickness, connecting to the biotic and the bioenergetics. They didn't pay any attention when Alexander Lowen, his prodigy, went on to elaborate on the whole bioenergetic theory of mankind. You see, they haven't listened to the Manuel Velikovskys and the Cummins Beaumonts and the McDarries. None of these mavericks have ever been welcomed or ever been purveyed. In fact, it was before the advent of the internet, and even still, it's quite difficult to find these people's work. So, and there's many, many other examples that one can give of this kind of thing, where there's active suppression of the mavericks. Absolutely. And then there's this whole carnival, the circus of the academica, just mulling over the most meaningless garbage. They've never been able to get to the bottom of anything that really matters. In fact, worse, now that we're into genes and we're into the science of the gene, you see, we have got some of the most pernicious people and the most pernicious mindsets operating again in one of the most vulnerable fields, in which, again, man is just a robot, man is just a cyborg, man is just a spiritual machine we can turn on and off under the pretext of making his life easier and his health better and all of this other malarkey. Look at the absolute horror of all of that, and the ideologies and philosophies that are now again being endorsed and purveyed, and millions of dollars. It would be okay if they just were sitting there and nobody funded them or took them seriously. We wouldn't be having this conversation. It wouldn't matter what these maniacs thought. But the problem is, the whole royal societies of the world are endorsing these people, and the think tanks are endorsing them, and the millions of dollars that they're being given, billions of dollars, into these areas, that they, again, like I said, all academics believe that they are masters of the game, that knowledge is something they own. They're like territorial.
Yeah.
They're exactly the same as some wrestler who's territorializing the ring. These people do not want to have, they're so arrogant and they're envious. Not one of them understands that knowledge is the, as I'll say this so many times, knowledge is the forte of all. Knowledge is not owned by a society. It doesn't have a logo. It doesn't have a stamp on it. It doesn't have a royal seal or a watermark on it. It doesn't have a hallmark, Knowledge is for you. It's for everybody. It's for anyone in the streets. Anyone. You don't have to, we've been trained to think in certain ways about knowledge and about observation. But the world of knowledge can be completely changed by one individual, by one child, by one prodigy, by one seeker. It's a matrix that anyone can get into and investigate and come to any kind of understanding. And it doesn't have to be circumvented by rightness and wrongness and, awards and flowers and speeches and all of this kind of thing. Knowledge is there for every human mind to investigate and discover by simple acts of observation and study. And the hell with all of these, colleges and universities and think tanks who, the whole meritocratic system that's just rotten. Look at Russell, right? What about Tesla?
Exactly.
Right? What about Walter Russell and Nikola Tesla, you see? And so many other great geniuses. The list goes on within the field of mathematics, within the field of archaeology, within the field of history. Edward Gibbon. Edward Gibbon is one of the greatest historians. He never received no damn knighthood or some letters after his name and all of this nonsense, you see. So we have mavericks in every field. And again, it goes to the heart of what I'm saying. And I hope that in the future it's going to be more so, that people get the guts to take on and handle some very large, difficult academic type subjects. And they feel that, hey, I don't need all of that rubbish. I can go to libraries, I can look on the internet, I can find things out for myself. I don't need to have a big agenda for doing that or anything like that. I want to find out. I have a love of knowledge, a love of wisdom. In all my work I am always pointing this out, that philosophy meant love of wisdom, not gaining of wisdom, gaining of knowledge. And gaining knowledge any idiot can do. But falling in love with knowledge, falling in love with wisdom and the process that it takes, this is what is lacking in our world today, you see. We don't have the passion. We have the vanity, we have the envy, we have the jealousy, we have all of these other things. But we don't have the love anymore for wisdom, for knowledge. That exists in very few people. And that's why those people who have now fallen out of love, what is the consequence of that? Well, it's orcdom. We're the orcs.
Yeah.
We're the people who sit there passively and just allow Big Brother, the media, to tell us what we're meant to believe, show us where to go, because we have no passion, no spirit, no energy left. We've basically debauched ourselves. Our minds have been completely raped, you see, and debauched. And parents are complicit in this, just as are the priests and the politicians as well. So there has to be a restoration. And the restoration is the Holy Spirit, the descent of the true Holy Spirit. It's this new understanding, and it is the mother nature rushing in to save her gormless kids from suicide by eating stuff that's just so wrong for them. And we are people who are just gobbling down the sugar, because it's sweet. And it can end up destroying us, poisoning ourselves. This is the narcissistic society that we find ourselves in today. But again, the ultimate solution is an individual one. It can only be an individual one, because if it isn't an individual motivation, then it's pure tyranny.